Okay, it's now 12:05. Thank you very much to everybody who's joined us this afternoon. Welcome to our World Asthma Day webinar. I'm Professor Refile Masekela. I'm the Principal Investigator of Acacia in South Africa. And I would like to welcome you all on this World Asthma Day. And if you know that the Global Initiative of Asthma has titled this year's World Asthma Day to be Closing the Gaps in Asthma Care. And what we thought today we would do is we would share some data from the Achieving Control of Asthma in Children in Africa, the data from the South African site, just to assist in how we can close these asthma gaps in the continent. So we're going to have a series of presentations. The first presentation will be by Dr. Reram Pashele. She will be sharing some of the Acacia data from the South African site. And then she'll be followed by Sister Lindsay Zaba, who will be sharing some of the Kappa data, which is just an extension of the Acacia study, where we looked at the impact of pollution on asthma. So I'm really excited that we're having this webinar today, and I'm going to hand over to Rera Mpashele, who's going to start with her presentation to share some of the data with us this afternoon. Thanks very much, Rera.
Thanks, Prof. I'm just going to share my slide for my presentation. Can everybody see my slides?
Yes, we can. Thank you, Rera.
Okay, thank you. I'll just switch off my video so that you don't get any feedback. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Prof, for the kind introduction. So I'll be presenting today some of the results from our research about asthma in adolescents. And these were collected from schools in Durban that so kindly allowed us to come into their spaces over the last 3 years. We are hoping that these can start the conversation to how we can help going forward. So this is a quick overview of the presentation. I will start with the background, explaining what were the reasons that we took on this research. And I'll also go on to introduce Acacia and what was done, and thereafter report on the results and finish off with a discussion and highlights of the challenges, and just discuss some of the highlights, challenges, and opportunities. So asthma is a chronic lung disorder that causes airways obstruction. And this can be caused by chronic inflammation, which causes the airways to swell or produce lots of thick mucus. So sometimes the muscles surrounding the airways also tend to tighten, and this makes an already clogged airway even narrower. This results also in asthma symptoms, and these can range anything from coughing, wheezing, and shortness of breath. So the reason we're concerned about this disease is that it's the most common disease or most common chronic airways disease in children. One of the biggest problems in a person with asthma is that the airways are overly sensitive to certain things, and these include allergies, viral infections, cold air, exercise, smoke, and air pollution. And these can then trigger or bring on asthma symptoms. And people with asthma often find that their symptoms come and go. So it's difficult to understand the disease and also seek help for their disease. When a child or an adolescent suffers from severe uncontrolled asthma, they experience symptoms throughout most of their days and nights. And this is because of the severity of their symptoms, and also in that it cannot be well controlled. So sometimes you might find that if they require medication or if they are on medication, they require more medication than any other person who has asthma. And also, you might also find that they have a reduced ability for their lungs to work as they should. Lastly, when an adolescent or a child has got severe asthma, we find that their quality of life is reduced. And this also may limit them in terms of being able to do physical activities or even do work at school. This also affects the healthcare systems in terms of hospitalizations and medications, in that they need more hospitalizations and more medication. And obviously, there are indirect costs where they may become absent from school, and also their parents who are taking care of them would become would have work losses and expenses due to their illness, as well as loss of time from work. So, although asthma occurs globally, not all asthma is the same. So it doesn't mean, or let me say, asthma doesn't present the same in all individuals. And also, the causes and drivers across the world are different too. So the numbers of people who have asthma across the world has been studied. And then through global surveys, it shows that the prevalence or the number of people who have asthma is different depending on certain regions. The regions with the lowest income have increased numbers of people with asthma compared to those with a high income. What's more, there's not only an increase in numbers, but also an increase in severity of asthma in these regions. In African countries, the drivers of these changes are not the same as those in high-income countries, and they remain poorly understood due to lack of infrastructure and capacity for research. So what's been shown currently is that as people are shifting from rural to urban settings, something that is happening in at a great rate in Africa. People are becoming more exposed to traffic-related pollution, burning of waste, cooking fuels, poor nutrition, smoking, and informal and overcrowded households. So it's highly important that we find out what the factors are related to asthma and what these are in our setting, particularly because in South Africa, according to the Global Asthma Network, which is a global survey, we have the highest number of adolescents who suffer from asthma. So to try to address these problems, Acacia is an international science project about asthma in African children, and it's running concurrently in 7 countries across Africa, and including South Africa. So our project is in collaboration with Professor Jonathan Grigg at Queen Mary University of London, and is funded by the National Institute of Health and Research. The project aims to identify altogether 3,000 adolescents aged 12 to 14 years with asthma symptoms. And secondly, to assess their asthma control, current medication and attitudes to asthma, as well as the barriers that are causing them to have poor control of asthma. So to reach our aim, we screened 13 to 14-year-old children for asthma symptoms and diagnosis by means of a breathing survey, which was modified from the internationally validated questionnaire. And those who were identified to have symptoms then went on to participate in our project. And here they filled in a questionnaire regarding asthma control, medication, and access to health. Then we went on to assess how well, their lungs work through lung function, and to assess whether they had chronic inflammation using a pheno testing machine. We also went on to have group discussions with adolescents, as well as teachers and the children's parents. And we also put together a theatre play to bring awareness and increase asthma knowledge that was produced by a Nigerian-born playwright, but adapted for South Africa by a South African director and performed by South African actors. All our activities, as mentioned on the previous slide, were done over the last 3 years, and but were severely affected by the pandemic, but we did still manage to complete most, if not all, of the data collection, the group discussions, as well as the plays. And we are thankful to those schools who were so cooperative and helped us to get the field work done. Here are some of the photos showing our fieldwork as we were identifying children with asthma symptoms through questionnaires and the special equipment, spirometry and phenotesting machines. And here are some of the photos with the Acetage group, which is a youth theatre group that brings awareness to chronic illnesses and illnesses in children. Here we had group discussions with parents, children, and teachers regarding their beliefs on asthma and their knowledge as well as perceptions on asthma. We did have to use social distancing and be aware of social distancing during while we're taking or doing the group discussions, but this didn't hamper our ability to get information and to talk to those who participated. So these were our results. We conducted the research in about 24 schools in Durban. We screened a total number of 2,032 children. The total number of children with asthma symptoms or a diagnosis made up 26% of the children who were screened. So these were then those who went into doing or participated in our data. This is the bar graph in the middle, written 529. So 529 out of the 2,032 participants went on to do the core data collection, which was answering a questionnaire and then having lung functions and phenotesting done. As you can see on the bottom corner, ethnicity, the majority of our participants were Black African, followed by Indian and mixed race and white adolescents. Most of our participants were female, who made up 57% of the population. Air quality in Durban has been quite a contentious issue. And then we know with previous research, there has been differences in terms of proportions of children who have asthma in the north compared to those who have asthma in the south. And it is well known that in the south, there are very many industrial areas that contribute to the proportion and therefore increasing the proportion of asthma in the children who reside there. Much of the data or much of the research that has been done previously shows that. So it was quite interesting, or we thought that it would be quite interesting to compare the two areas from the schools that we took data from. So this graph shows the proportion of children with asthma in Durban. And these are the children who answered yes when they were asked about asthma symptoms in the last 12 months. So at the top, it says asthma prevalence. Those are the number of children who had asthma symptoms within the last 12 months. And this was about 22.4% in the whole group of the children in which we screened. Then when we divided it and looked at the proportions in each area, Durban South and Durban North, we found that those who were residing in Durban South had a proportion of 23.5%, and those in the North had a proportion of 21.5%. And if you look at these, it's not very different. They're not very different in terms of proportion. I thought then it would also be diligent of me to show you the distribution of each school in terms of the proportion of asthma within each school. And as you can see on the left in the green, those are the schools from Durban South, and in the blue on the right, those are the schools from Durban North. And as you can, with the bar graph, you can see that they range from a percentage of as low as 15% to others as high as 38%. And then also one can appreciate that more schools in the north were or contributed to our population, but still the numbers or the proportions still seem the same. So I thought, looking a little closer, we should look a little closer at the schools that contributed the highest proportion in terms of those children who have asthma symptoms. And then, as you can see, and this is in Durban South, the schools themselves are in and amongst those who had lower prevalences or lower proportions of asthma. And they're also distributed across the whole of the south of Durban, and not only in the notorious industrial sites, particularly in the Merebank Basin. And then looking closer at the distribution of schools in Durban North, these two are also in and amongst the schools with lower prevalences, and not very many inside industrial areas. So I also just want to give a bit of a report in terms of the children that we found to have severe asthma symptoms. As mentioned previously, the children who had symptoms by the validated questionnaire, and therefore giving us the prevalence or proportion of children with asthma in Durban, on your left, that pie chart on your left was 22%. But of those children who said that they had wheezing within the last 12 months, 42% of them had severe symptoms, and that is a large number of those who are having current symptoms. But if you look on the right, in the pie chart on the right, these children only contribute 13% of the whole population. So the pie charts on the left, far left, and the far right give you an indication of the number of children having wheeze in the last 12 months, and then within the whole population, and the number of children who are having severe wheeze within the larger population. And as you can see, those with severe asthma are much less than those with current wheeze. But this is thinking of the previous slide, we see that actually, even though we have more current wheezers or more children who are saying that they've got wheeze within the last 12 months, much less of them have got a diagnosis. So 45% of them have got a diagnosis compared to those who have severe wheeze. And that's about 55% of the population that have severe wheeze. Sorry, that have a diagnosis of asthma. And when we look at the burden, looking at what is it that they complain about, we can see that almost half of the children have got wheeze so severe that it's limiting their speech between breaths. And at least 20 or more than 20% have got disturbed sleep due to wheeze at least more than once in the week. And then also just above 20% have got 4 or more attacks, or have had 4 or more attacks in the last 12 months. So this is a large number or a high burden in these children. When we look at who is diagnosing asthma, it's quite clear that it's not just the doctor who is diagnosing asthma, as many children went on to choose that someone else other than the doctor said they had asthma. I chose to put this graph on just to give you an indication of what it is we found on lung function of these children. So as mentioned, spirometry is a machine, or a spirometer is a machine that measures the lung function of a child or anyone who is using it. And this would show either whether you've got obstruction, as mentioned, that asthma causes blockage of the airways, or whether your lungs are working or not working as well as they should. So this whisker and box chart shows that most of the children whose lung functions were done had a good lung function or did not have obstruction, as those who would have poor lung function would plot below the 0.8 line. So you can see that the whole population plotted above the 0.8 line, meaning that none of them had blocked airways or obstruction. When looking at the FeNO, or amount of nitric oxide that the children breathed out onto the FeNO machine, we see that most of them, or about 40% of them, not most of them, a large number of them, 40% of them had were ranging up to, or ranging more than 25. And when you have a range of particles more than 25, it means that you may have chronic inflammation. And we can see that in our population, about 40% of these children was or had chronic inflammation. And actually, this machine was able to identify our children much better than the spirometry did. When looking at our children in terms of their access to medication and healthcare, we found that about 25% of children said they had an inhaler for their asthma symptoms, and 75% of children said they did not. Regarding emergency treatment in the last 12 months, only 44% said they had never visited the emergency room in the last 12 months. Whereas about 9% said they had visited it 4 or more times. About 22% mentioned that they had visited the emergency room or casualty 2 to 3 times in the last month, and 44% said not at all. When we look at the asthma control score, and this is a score that is used to check how well controlled your asthma is, only 19% of the children who had said they had asthma in the last 12 months had well controlled asthma. Just a look at where and how we did our theatre performance, or the theatre plays. Over the date of the 15th to the 25th of March, about 19 school performances were done, and around 1,163 learners saw the production, and about 4 community performances were done in and around the areas of Durban, and around 170 community members saw the production. And I just want to show you a small clip of one of the videos, or one of the videos that were done at a school performance.
Works fine, Baba. These past few days you've not been taken into school, no feel about. If you want to play soccer, you have to take him into go to the hotel symptoms every day, especially with this coronavirus that they're talking about. I'm going to tell you, coach, watch you, make sure that you take your medicine regularly. I'm just going to tell her, coach. I don't want them. Who are they? You have to stop this nonsense. You cannot refuse to be helped when you are not well. But Mama, once they know your thing, you know, she doesn't take a lot of money, put it on bathi ungasheshe uyeke engakakukhiphi.
Baba kalokuphila nawe.
Bayasho futhi ukuthi iy'kole ziyavalwa kule nyanga ezayo. No school, no soccer. Yonke into ezovala wonke la manyala. Baba, no mama, to mamina, to mamina, to mamina. Baba, no mama, to mamina.
As you can see, this was quite a riveting production that involved music. It was also translated into English and isiZulu, and was also very interactive with the participants or those who were watching. In terms of the focus groups, we had adolescents, parents, and teachers who we went into discussion with. This was over the years 2021 and 2022. There were 23 groups that were conducted. These were done in English as well as isiZulu, and about 4 or 12 people allowing for social distancing were interviewed, or we had a discussion with those at a time. These are just some of the pictures showing the focus groups that we had with the parents, teachers, as well as the adolescents. Some of these adolescents would have asthma or severe asthma, and some would not. And we would ask different questions based on whether they had a diagnosis of asthma or not. We were also here able to find out what knowledge and what were the perceptions and attitudes around asthma were in the different groups of children, parents, as well as adolescents, as well as teachers. So here are some of the quotes from the focus groups where teachers felt that they were powerless to help a child who had asthma or who had an asthma attack at school, and sometimes medication was not provided or not allowed at school. Some were saying that they are happy to collaborate with researchers to come and educate children at school, and they also mentioned that they had very little knowledge on asthma. Regarding parents, some felt that they were fearful of an asthma diagnosis, and but would manage to do as they were told by a healthcare worker in taking care of their children. When it came to some quotes from the children, those who had severe asthma mentioned that it
We can't hear you anymore. Yeah.
So in summary, our findings are that the prevalence of asthma in Durban adolescents is high. Similar to the globally high prevalence or globally high proportion of children with asthma that was found in Cape Town as well as other African countries. The burden of asthma in adolescents is also similar across Durban North and South, and it seems that more data is needed around personal exposure to air quality, as some of these children or some of these schools where we had high proportions of asthma, there isn't really a noticeable contributing source. Most adolescents with asthma also suffer from severe asthma, as you saw on my previous slide, where almost half of the children who wheeze due to asthma, their symptoms limit their activities. And then also 1 in 5 children with asthma have at least 4 or more attacks a year, and that is quite a burden of asthma. There is also a lack of asthma diagnosis among adolescents with asthma symptoms, and we're also finding that a diagnosis is more common in children or adolescents with severe asthma than those with current asthma. And this may speak to the fact that obviously it is much more obvious when you're having severe symptoms, but a tragedy if we will not find those who have current symptoms, as they may go on to become severe. Regarding diagnosis in adolescents, this is asthma diagnosis is confirmed by features of obstruction on spirometry, and as you saw in my previous slide, the most or all of the children, even though they mentioned that they've got asthma symptoms, their features on spirometry were normal. There were no features of blockage on spirometry. And this is actually the gold standard of asthma diagnosis. And also, what we find is that adolescents in our population, or those who have asthma symptoms, also have chronic inflammation, as shown by the FeNO machine testing, where most of them had a level that was higher than the cutoff point for a normal or no inflammation in the airway. Just to mention some of the highlights and challenges that Acacia had, I think one of the biggest highlights is that we were able to foster relationships with schools and to create community awareness about asthma, as well as about asthma triggers and drivers of asthma. And we were also able to find out or to engage with the community in our focus groups or in our discussion groups to find out what the problems are, how it is that we can help, and that is why we were able to deliver a theater or a play for the schools, to give back to schools, to increase awareness about asthma and to increase awareness and knowledge on asthma. And then what was also wonderful about the play that was performed for our students and for our community is that we were able to do before and after knowledge testing to see how well it is that the production or the performance did in increasing awareness and increasing knowledge on asthma. Lastly, the challenges that we had were mostly due to COVID-19 and the lockdown. As you know, in March 2020, we had a hard lockdown when schools were closed, and this severely impacted our fieldwork. And but thank you once again to the schools that once they were open, even though they had to catch up, they were able to accommodate us to provide the interventions and also to do our data collection and run our focus groups. So thank you so much to those schools. So in conclusion, there is a high burden of asthma in adolescents, and it seems that there is variability or variation in terms of where it is they are. And also, we need to advocate and educate because it seems there are gaps in access to diagnosis and treatment for children, especially adolescents. Looking at our data and looking at what we have found, it would be good to run good quality research where we will include assessment and checking of inflammation, as we saw that is something that is visible within these children, as well as look at personal air pollution profiles, or look at what is it that the particular children who have high or those who have high proportion, or schools that have high proportion of asthma, what are the exposures of the children that attend these schools? What are the personal exposures that attend of these children that are attending these schools? And then lastly, community engagement is critical in research, and we have found this out through the running of our project Acacia. We have really enjoyed creating relationships and working with the schools to increase awareness and to improve knowledge regarding asthma. We have also learned a lot in where the gaps and what needs to be addressed in schools and communities where children are suffering from asthma. And going forward, we intend to engage the public through this is a virtual session with schools and the community, as well as the university and staff and academics, informing about what it is that we have done and found in Acacia. We're also hoping to create or to develop a website and social media platforms where we can share some of the performances that were done in the theatre, share some information and infographics in terms of what it is that we have found in our project, and then also want to reach out to the community through community radio stations. Secondly, we'd like to build capacity in terms of creating or developing educational interventions that are evidence-based or that we develop based on what it is that we have found. So they're going to be appropriate for our community, they're going to be appropriate for our children. And then we'd like to upskill healthcare workers as well as those who want to be educated. For example, we mentioned that the teachers are happy to be informed about how it is that they can take care of children with asthma or adolescents with asthma. As mentioned, we will be reporting and doing publications on our report, on our project. And then also we are collaborating with even more service providers to bring about awareness of asthma as well as pollution in our community. I'd like to just acknowledge the team that form part of the Acacia South Africa project. These are Professor Refulo Masekela, who opened our webinar today, our research assistant, Cindy Siwetlala, and our field team that is coordinated by Sister Lindsay Zoba, who is going to be doing our next presentation. And then obviously just a big thank you to the schools and participating school children, principals and school teachers, and especially the parents who allowed us to come into their lives and do our research and become part of the Acacia family. And as well as our funders, the NIHR, as well as the Queen Mary University of London, and as well as Education for Health Africa, that's run by Sister Lindsay Zoba, who were doing the field work, and as well as the university for providing us the platform to run our study. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Vera. That was really a fantastic overview of the study, and I really appreciate that. I think in interest of time, we're going to move on to the next presentation by Lindsay. We will take questions at the end of the webinar. For anybody who's got questions, if you want to post them in the chat, just so that you don't forget. Otherwise, we'll take all the questions at the end. Thanks. Lindsay, please go ahead.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to colleagues, teachers, principals, parents, and everybody who's come to celebrate World Asthma Day with us today. My name is Lindsay, and I'm going to be taking you through the next part of the Acacia study, an extension study called CAPA, which stands for Children's Air Pollution Profiles in Africa. I think I'll just put off my video at this point, and I'll take you through it. All right, so in terms of my presentation, we're going to look at the background. What is the problem with air pollution, and why do we need to carry on researching it? What did we want to know? Why did we do it? How did we do it? And what did we find? So for the longest time, we've known that air pollution causes health problems, and that in children particularly, they are more vulnerable because they are still developing. So any lost volume in children is not regained and can have long-lasting impacts on their health and the quality of their lives. Children with asthma particularly have additional challenges with respiratory health, making them very sensitive to both chronic and acute air pollution exposure. So the amount of air pollution an individual breathes depends on where they live. It depends on their community and their home environments. When it comes to asthma and air pollution specifically, there's been a long link to asthma with exposure to air pollution. So we know that air pollution can make asthma symptoms worse and also trigger asthma attacks. So any pollutants in the air, they have the same effect on kids with asthma as other triggers. So they irritate the airways, they make them swell up, tighten, and they cause breathing problems. And pollutants can also make kids more likely to catch upper respiratory tract infections, and that can bring on asthma symptoms. So when it came to Kappa, we used these small portable light quality air sensors. So if you look in the top right-hand corner there, you can see the backpacks which carried these little sensors, which were able to capture a very accurate picture of a child's personal air pollution exposure as they went about their normal day. So the measurements that we got were directly relevant to the child's health and assessed the quality of air that that child was breathing, both indoors, for example, maybe when cooking or cleaning, as well as outdoors, so when at school or on transport. So the children that we used were children that we had identified with asthma in the Acacia study, and they went on to carry these backpacks so that we could pick up the specific data which allowed us to identify how a child's behavior, their routes, etc., and their exposure levels directly related to their health. So what Kappa did was it helped us to look at a person's daily life, to look at the quality of air that that person was breathing and look at how that issue was affecting their health. So when the final data is analyzed, it becomes very personal. So they can see where they moved and what they were vulnerable to. So you can see that we've, for a while now, we've had quite a few studies which are quite well established in Europe. But up till now, we haven't had such large-scale studies in Africa. So the purpose of the Kappa study was to close the gap by looking at air pollution exposure related to health in Africa's young population. And then we can also look at that data compared to what we see in Europe. So the primary aim of the Kappa study was to describe how much air pollution urban children with asthma symptoms in sub-Saharan Africa are exposed to, as well as the location of the air pollution, the type of transport that the children were taking, indoor and outdoor microenvironments, activity profiles, and also the effect of socioeconomic variables. The secondary aim was to explore the connections of air pollution exposure to lung health and lung function in these children. So we collected up personal air pollution exposure data, activity profiles, and lung function measurements from, well, we aimed to get 420 children aged between 12 and 16 years across 7 African cities and 7 African countries. And you can see them there on the map on the right-hand side. We did this study in Ghana, Nigeria, Uganda, Tanzania, Zimbabwe, and South Africa. We then analyzed the personal air pollution data for exposure patterns, and we look at peak exposures and compared what we find on the African continent with data that is measured from the same age of children in London. And lastly, we explore the potentially detrimental effects of air pollution and the feasibility of mitigation strategies in children with asthma symptoms. There are three pillars to the study which we've just done. The first one was that the children would carry air pollution exposure data backpacks. So those little monitors, you can see it there inside the backpack. The children had to carry those backpacks so that we could measure their exposure to air pollution. After that, we did what we call focus groups. They're little discussion groups where we then found a little bit more about what the parents and children know at the moment about air pollution. And lastly, we are then going to do an intervention where we bring education back to the schools. So we still have to finish that part of the study, which will be happening in the next couple of weeks at schools in Durban. But we are going to teach the children about air pollution. So internationally, we had 7 countries over 22 weeks between June and November 2021. We eventually got 331 children. We aimed for 420, but with COVID, there were some countries that the children weren't going to school at all, which made it very difficult to collect data. But we achieved data on 331 children across the 7 countries using 55 backpacks. We got 1,324 daily diary entries, that's activity profiles, where the children went and what they were doing. We got 2.9 million minutes of air pollution data, and we got almost 9,000 peak flow measurements. So that's the little measurement of the child's lung function. In South Africa specifically, we did our CAPA study for 10 weeks between August and October 2021. We managed to get data from 63 children using 8 backpacks, which included daily diaries about where they were, what they might have been exposed to on the way to school, and we also measured their lung function. So the first part of the study was that the children carried these backpacks for 4 days, containing the little air pollution monitor. So inside that backpack, there was also a GPS tracker and sensors which captured the particulate matter in the air that the children were in. At the same time, the children told us where they were and what they were doing. So they told us if they walked to school, maybe caught a car, a bus, a taxi, etc., what form of transport they used. And in addition, we did a peak flow in the morning and in the evening and measured peak flow as well as FEV1 measurements. Some of the very small challenges that we had, we noticed that one of the backpacks disconnected from the battery. So we made sure that we checked the backpacks every single day with the children at school during that week. There were 1 or 2 children that shifted households in the course of the weeks. And so we needed to spend a little bit of time chatting to the other parent or the other family that was hosting the child about the backpack, if they didn't yet know about it. And we also made sure that in the evenings, we reminded the children to check their peak flow measurements. So there weren't a lot of challenges and they were easily overcome. The second part of the study was to conduct these little discussion groups. So we went along to the schools and we did just 3 schools across Durban in the week of the 22nd to the 25th of March. We did 4 child discussion groups and 4 parent discussion groups. Every child and every parent was given a questionnaire. And we also had a facilitator's guide, which just guided us to make sure that there was a standardized approach to how we ask children questions about what they know about air pollution. And these were some of the results of the questions and of those discussion groups. So almost 49% of the people that attended the focus groups were parents, and then 51% were students. 80% were female and 20% were male. Most people had heard about air pollution, 88%, but about 12% had never heard about air pollution. Most people knew that air pollution is a worldwide problem, but there were a couple that didn't know, or someone that thought that it wasn't a problem. Most people had heard about air pollution and some hadn't. And sorry, let me just go to my next slide here. So some people didn't, most people knew that air pollution was a problem in their particular country, or in South Africa, I should say. But about 17% weren't sure whether air pollution was a problem in South Africa. In the community, 66% thought that there was a problem with air pollution in the community. 17% didn't think there was a problem, and 17% didn't really know. Most people did know that you can find air pollution inside the house. That was 66%. About 20% didn't know, and about 15% thought that you don't get air pollution inside your own home. About 37% of people thought that air pollution could be a problem in their own home. 39% said they didn't think it was a problem in their own home, and 24% didn't really know. Most people, 93% of people, know that air pollution is worse when people smoke. And also most people, that is 76%, know that air pollution is worse in some places rather than others. Most people think there is a way to reduce air pollution, that's 88%. And most people also know that they can help with making the air cleaner around their house and in their community. Again, most people did know that a tight feeling in a person's chest can be caused by air pollution, but there were as many as 17% that didn't know. And again, most people know that air pollution affects people with asthma more than the average person. That was 95% of people agreed with that. But there were a couple who didn't know or who didn't think that air pollution affects people with asthma more than others. In terms of looking at air pollution affecting people more when they play sport, most people agreed or strongly agreed. So 37% of people agreed and 20% of people strongly agreed that air pollution affects people more when they play sport. And then as many as 27% were neutral on that one, but there were 7% that strongly disagreed and 9.8% that just disagreed that air pollution affects people more when they play sport. In terms of influencing how much air pollution a person breathes in, some people agreed so strongly. So some people strongly agreed, 12%, and about 24% agree that they can influence how much air pollution they breathe in, but the majority of people were neutral on that one. They weren't sure whether they could or couldn't influence how much air pollution they breathe in. And there were 17% that disagreed with that statement and 2.4% that strongly disagreed. In terms of understanding air pollution, 46% think they do understand air pollution. 14 or 15, let's call it 15% were neutral on that one. And then there were 26% that disagreed or strongly disagreed that they understand air pollution. And most people felt that it's really important to talk about air pollution. And they also, most people thought that it is very important to be taught about air pollution in the schools. 56% of our focus group participants had training. It was mostly the children that told us that they had some air pollution training in school, which was encouraging. And 44% had never learned about air pollution formally. And that was mainly feedback from the parents. So in terms of the discussion groups, that was the data that we have to date. We haven't finished completely assessing that data in South Africa as yet. But in general, anecdotally, when we did these discussion groups, we observed that in both the adults and in the children, participants were commenting mostly on what they could see around them as relevant. So when they spoke about air pollution in the groups, they were speaking about litter, waste, smoke, and cigarette smoke, rather than, there were a few that spoke about factories, but not that many that spoke about transportation and the roles of different forms of transport in air pollution. And what was really lovely is in the focus groups, we learned that the participants really enjoyed the studies. At first, they were a little bit reticent, but once they learned to trust us, they were all very, very positive about the research and kept asking us if we could bring more research projects to them. So in terms of some of the challenges, they weren't big challenges, but we found that we needed to try really hard to get one-on-one conversations with the parents to just explain the studies to them. And we came up with a solution to actually visit parents in their homes, sit and talk to them about what the different studies that we're doing at UKZN and how they could participate and what this would mean to them. We made sure that we scheduled our groups very early in the mornings to allow the parents to go directly to work afterwards, because it's difficult for parents to get out of work. There were some with transport issues, so we were fortunate to have a vehicle where we could go and fetch the children and the parents, or just the parents from their homes, to attend the focus groups. We learned that we needed to be very organized to be able to start our groups on time. And importantly, we wanted to be able to conduct the groups in the participants' first language. So in some of the schools, that was English, and in some of the schools, that was Zulu. So in terms of the workshops, these are the educational workshops which we are still going to run. And what we will be doing is now giving back into the schools and the communities, the participants that helped us, by informing and educating them about air pollution, the different sources of air pollution and how it affects our lungs and asthma. So we will go into each classroom and spend about 45 minutes with some very hands-on exercises, demonstrating air pollution, how, and letting the children do little activities themselves. We'd love to get some photos of the workshops to share with other schools and other countries that are busy with the study as well, and we will try and get permissions for that as well. So these are some of this is just, for example, one activity as we talk about air pollution, how we demonstrate that using a glass. Now, when it comes to analyzing the data of what we've seen, I've put South Africa's data has not been analyzed yet at a very high level, but I have put up these slides just to show you what the effect looks like. So you'll see that speed was calculated between each 1 minute GPS point along with a rolling average 5-minute speed. So you'll just, on that map, you can just see where the participant went and what sort of air pollution they were exposed to. So the red dots are the highest areas of pollution. So you can see that each dot is a 1 minute exposure. And interesting, this is an interesting trip where you can see a car perhaps on one of the main roads, high exposures at the start and end of the trip, but not on the main road. Whereas on the smaller roads where the participant was perhaps walking, there might have been dust. So you would expect a low ratio going to high with the dust. This is not an example from South Africa, but this is an example from another country to just show you the difference in walking and bus transportation. The red dots show the bus transportation, and the green dots in this particular country show the walking. And we still have some work to do in working out our commuting modes, major roads, back streets, things like that. But this at least gives you a visual image of how the data is looked at in the end. So when it comes to some results from Durban, our overall average PM particulate matter of 2.5 exposure for 46 Durban children in Kappa was 25.6. And this is much higher than the current World Health Organization guideline, which states that the levels should not exceed 15 for a 24-hour exposure. So we can see that already in Durban that our levels of exposure that children are exposed to are higher than we would like them to be. When we split the exposures into different microenvironments, we see different exposure trends. So while the children were at school, their exposure was the lowest at 15.9. And this is likely due to the lack of direct pollution sources on the school grounds. So I know from my travels between the different sites for the study, schools, for example, in South Africa and Zimbabwe, had perhaps less, had coverings on the grounds of either concrete or grass, more so than perhaps some of the other countries where the school grounds were a little bit more dusty. So traveling to school resulted in approximately 1.5 times higher exposure compared to at-school exposure, and this must be due to traffic emissions on the road. However, traveling to school exposure was higher at 23.4 compared to traveling to school at 20.7, and this might be due to traffic being higher in the morning compared to when a child travels at home in the afternoon. And additionally, wind speeds are typically lower in the morning, so air pollution is less likely to disperse, and that could be a reason for the results that we see on this slide. So the Kappa children filled in a daily diary indicating how they traveled to and from the school each day. And in Durban, 56% of children walked, while 36% took a taxi, and 18% of the children took a bus. When we look at the exposure to and from school using different transport modes, exposure is at its lowest when walking. That was at about 19.2. As you're further away from the traffic emissions, and there's also better dispersion of pollution when you are walking compared to when you're inside a motorized vehicle. Traveling by bus at 21 or by a taxi at 23.6 had higher exposures, and this was likely to due to motorized vehicles being right behind other vehicles with exhaust emissions, particularly in the traffic. So also the vehicle cabin that a child could be traveling in can actually accumulate air pollution within inside the vehicle, let's say inside a taxi or a car when the windows are closed. So these results highlight that it is better to walk than take motorized transport in South Africa, as it will not only reduce a child's exposure to air pollution, but also provides the benefits of exercise. So some summary of results so far in Durban. The overall average exposure of Durban children in Kappa is typically higher than we would like it to be. There's different exposure trends with the school microenvironment contributing to the lowest proportion of exposure, followed by the home environment, and then lastly followed by the commute to school. Motorized transport had higher exposures when compared with walking. Just one or two insights across the countries. It appears that there's higher exposures at school and commuting in Moshi in Tanzania and Lagos in Nigeria. However, in Harare in Zimbabwe and Durban here in South Africa, school had the lowest exposure. So there were some differences between the countries. And also the exposure to CO2 in South Africa was higher than children in Tanzania, despite the fact that South Africa has got lower levels of CO2. So despite the fact that in South Africa, we do not have high levels of use of biomass fuels for cooking, etc., it looks like children are exposed to a very high level of pollution, which might be caused by industry and cars, etc. So the intensive monitoring we have done using the backpacks in Kappa has helped us or will help us to understand these high levels of exposure. So the next step is for us to conduct our educational workshops to give back a little bit to the schools and the participants and the community at large with our workshops on air pollution. And we definitely want to be back with an intervention study later. So we would like our next step of this project to be something about reducing the exposure to air pollution. Our experience from the fieldwork, we learned so much about the public school system, and really which was quite humbling was that the schools are such busy places. They've got such huge responsibilities and so much to think about and do, but they really made time to collaborate with UKZN as a team, and we are really grateful to you. We just want to say a special shout out to those principals that and teachers who welcomed us and made that extra time in their day to help us out with conducting this research. The children were really a joy for every member of the study team. We loved every minute with them. They're hungry for knowledge. They love to learn. And lastly, we learned that there's many differences, but also many similarities across the countries. We'd like to acknowledge all our funders, the central teams, all the universities and communities that have collaborated with us on this project. And then lastly, to the local UKZN team, thank you very much to everybody. And most of all, the biggest thank you to our schools, our school children, our principals, our school teachers, and our parents. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Lindsay. That was really fantastic. I think we've just run over time, but if anybody has any burning questions that they would like to ask, we may give ourselves another minute or two to answer the questions. If anybody has anything to ask, you're welcome to. Otherwise, I think that really the data speaks for itself. And thanks very much, Rira and Lindsay, for your fantastic presentations. Does anybody have any questions before we close? Okay, so I think there's not questions that I can see at the moment, but if anybody has anything to pose, you're welcome to contact either Rira, myself, or just send us an email. We'll be happy to answer your questions. But I think I think this is just the first step. It looks like we've identified the problem, and now we should probably think about what are we going to do about the areas that we've identified. And I wish you all a happy World Asthma Day, and we'll continue to close the gaps on asthma. Thanks everybody for joining us for the session. Thank you.
Thanks everyone.
Thank you.